The grand throne room of the Xerthian Empire was silent, filled with tension. King Vathar, a massive alien warrior clad in dark armor, sat on his throne, staring down at the human standing before him. Commander Daniel Cross, a seasoned human warrior, did not flinch under the king's gaze. "I am offering you my daughter," the king spoke, his voice deep and commanding. "Take her, train her, make her strong, or let her die." Daniel frowned. He had expected a political hostage, maybe an elite warrior princess, but instead he saw a small, fragile girl standing beside the throne. She had silver-blue skin, soft violet eyes, and delicate features. Unlike the other Xerthians, she looked weak, almost sickly. She kept her head lowered, her hands clenched tightly at her sides. Her name was Lyara, the youngest princess of the Xerthian Empire. She was born weaker than her siblings, unable to match their strength in combat. Among her people, strength was everything. Without it, she was nothing. Daniel looked at the girl and then back at the king. "Why are you giving her to me?" Vathar's expression darkened. "She shames my bloodline. I have tried everything. Nothing works. But humans, you fight differently. You survive against stronger foes. If she dies under you, then at least I will know she was never meant to live." Lyra flinched but said nothing. Daniel let out a slow breath. He had fought against Xerthians in the past. Powerful, ruthless warriors. They had no patience for weakness. This was not a gift. It was a test. "She's not a soldier," Daniel said. "She's barely standing." "She is your problem now, human," Vathar said coldly. "Take her, or leave her to rot." Daniel studied the girl again. Something in her eyes caught his attention. Though she was afraid, though her body was weak, there was a flicker of something else. Determination. Finally, he nodded. "Fine. I'll take her." A murmur spread through the court. Some warriors laughed. Others whispered that the weak princess would not last a week. Lyra looked up at Daniel for the first time. He was different from her people. There was no cruelty in his gaze, no mockery. Only calm judgment. Daniel turned to leave. "Come with me," he said. For a moment, she hesitated. Then, taking a deep breath, she stepped forward, leaving behind the only home she had ever known. As they walked out of the grand palace, Daniel glanced at her. "First rule, you don't die on me," he said. "Understood." Lyra swallowed and nodded. "Understood." He sighed. This was going to be a challenge. The journey to Daniel's base was long and silent. Lyra walked behind him, her movements slow, her breath uneven. The desert sun burned overhead, and the rocky terrain made every step harder for her weak body. Daniel could hear her struggling, but he didn't help. If she wanted to survive, she had to learn. After hours of walking, they reached a human outpost, a rough metal structure hidden between cliffs. Human soldiers moved around, training, fixing equipment, and preparing for missions. They stopped and stared as Daniel walked in with the alien princess. "Who's the kid?" one soldier asked, raising an eyebrow. "New trainee," Daniel said simply. The soldier scoffed. "She won't last a day." Lyra lowered her eyes, but she said nothing. She had heard these words her entire life. Daniel led her to a small training ground behind the outpost. The area was rough, just sand, stones, and training dummies made of metal. Weapons lined the walls, but Daniel didn't give her one. Instead, he pointed to a large, heavy rock. "Lift it." Lyra blinked. "What?" "Lift it," Daniel repeated. She looked at the rock. It was twice the size of her head. Her people valued strength, but she had never been strong. I can't," she whispered. Daniel folded his arms. "Then you better figure out how. Because out here, no one is going to save you." She clenched her fists, hesitated, then bent down to lift it. Her arms trembled, her legs shook, and she barely managed to raise it an inch before dropping it. The impact kicked up a small cloud of dust. Daniel sighed. Pathetic. Anger burned in Lyra's chest, but she didn't respond. She had no right to be angry. He was right. Daniel paced around her. Your father gave you away because you were weak. Do you think he's wrong? Lyra swallowed hard. I don't know. Wrong answer, Daniel snapped. The only thing that matters is what you're going to do about it. She took a deep breath. I'll try again. Daniel nodded. Good, but trying isn't enough. You either get stronger or you die. For the next few hours, he pushed her harder than she had ever been pushed before. Not with brute force, but with endurance, discipline, and problem-solving. He made her run laps, carry small weights, and dodge simple attacks. Each failure frustrated her, but she refused to quit. By nightfall, her body ached, her muscles screamed, and her breath came in gasps. Daniel stood over her. Pain means you're getting stronger, he said. Sleep now. Tomorrow will be worse. Lyra lay on the ground, staring at the stars. She had never felt more exhausted, but also, for the first time in her life, she felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could become something more. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Daniel kicked Lyra's foot to wake her up. Up. Now. Lyra groaned, her muscles aching from yesterday's training. Every inch of her body felt heavy, sore, and exhausted. She had never worked this hard in her life. But she didn't complain. She forced herself up, standing on shaky legs. Daniel tossed a small water bottle at her. Drink fast. Today, you fight. Lyra's eyes widened. Fight. But I'm not ready. Daniel shrugged. The universe doesn't care if you're ready. She swallowed hard but nodded. She had promised herself she wouldn't give up. The first fight. Daniel led her to an open training area. 2 human soldiers and a Zerthian warrior were already waiting. The Zerthian, Gorak, was twice her size, his muscular arms covered in scars. He smirked when he saw Lyra. This is the weak princess. Gorak laughed. I could break her with one hand. Lyra's hands clenched into fists, but she said nothing. Daniel stepped forward. Gorak, you're not fighting her. She's fighting both of them. He pointed at the 2 human soldiers. Lyra's heart pounded. 2 opponents. Basic rules, Daniel continued. They won't kill you, but they will hurt you. Your job. Survive. The soldiers circled her, their movements precise and practiced. Lyra's breath quickened. Then the first soldier struck. She barely dodged, but the second soldier was faster. A sharp kick hit her side, knocking her to the ground. Pain shot through her ribs, but Daniel's voice cut through the fog. Get up. She forced herself onto her hands and knees. The soldiers didn't wait. Another hit came, a fist to her shoulder, sending her tumbling again. Move faster. Think faster, Daniel barked. Lyra rolled to the side, avoiding another strike. Her mind was racing. She couldn't overpower them. She had to be smarter. One of the soldiers lunged. This time, instead of dodging, she stepped toward him, too close for a proper punch. The soldier hesitated. Lyra slammed her knee into his stomach. He stumbled back, gasping. She had landed a hit. Excitement flared in her chest, but she had no time to celebrate. The second soldier grabbed her wrist and twisted, forcing her to the ground. Wrong move, Daniel muttered. Lyra gritted her teeth. She was still too slow, too weak. But she had learned something today. She could fight back. The sparring match continued, and by the end, she was bruised, bleeding, and barely able to stand. But for the first time, when she looked at Daniel, he didn't look disappointed. He gave a small nod. Not bad. Lyra wiped the blood from her lip and smiled through the pain. She was getting stronger. Lyra's entire body ached. Bruises covered her arms. Her ribs felt like they were on fire, and her legs trembled with every step. But she refused to fall. Daniel watched as she dragged herself to the training area again. No complaints, no excuses. That was a good sign. You're slow, he said. and weak. Liara clenched her jaw but said nothing. "That's the bad news," Daniel continued. "The good news? You're still here." He tossed her a wooden practice knife. She caught it clumsily. "Again?" she asked, barely able to hold it steady. "Again," Daniel confirmed. "Lessons in strategy." This time, Daniel himself was her opponent. He didn't go easy on her. Each time she attacked, he dodged effortlessly. Every move she made, he countered before she even finished it. It was frustrating. She lunged forward. Daniel grabbed her wrist, twisted it, and sent her crashing into the dirt. "You're thinking like a Zerthian," he said. Liara groaned, lying flat on the ground. "I am a Zerthian." "Then start fighting like a human," he said. She frowned, breathing heavily. "What does that mean?" Daniel crouched beside her. "Your people fight with power. Humans fight with adaptation. We don't just follow the rules. We break them. We use the environment. We mislead. We survive. That's why we win." Liara listened carefully. She had spent her whole life trying to be like her stronger siblings, but Daniel was saying she didn't have to be like them. She had to be something else. "Get up," he ordered. She did, adapting to survive. The next time she attacked, she used her speed instead of strength. Instead of blocking his next strike, she sidestepped and let his own momentum throw him off balance. Instead of forcing her way through his guard, she feinted left and struck right. Daniel smiled. "Now you're learning." It didn't mean she won. She still lost every match. She still ended up on the ground, breathless and aching. But each time, she lasted longer. Her reflexes got faster. Her instincts got sharper. And Daniel, for the first time, didn't call her weak. The spark of change. That night, Liara sat by the campfire, wrapping her bruised knuckles in cloth. She looked at her hands, the same hands that once trembled at the thought of combat. They still shook, but not from fear, from exhaustion, from effort, from progress. Daniel sat across from her, watching. "You know," he said, "your father expected you to fail." Liara's grip tightened on the cloth. "I know. But you're still here," Daniel said. "And you're getting stronger." She met his gaze. "I won't stop." Daniel smirked. "Good, because tomorrow it gets harder." Liara smiled. "Let it." Liara's heart pounded as she stood in the center of the training ground. Today was different. Daniel had warned her earlier, "Your real test starts now." She didn't know what that meant, until now. Before her stood Gorek, the massive Zerthian warrior, the same one who had mocked her on the first day. His muscular arms were crossed, and his sharp fangs were visible in his smirk. "She's still too weak," Gorek sneered. "I'll finish this in seconds." Daniel ignored him and looked at Liara. This time, no training weapons. Real fight. Real blades. No holding back. Liara swallowed hard. She had never fought with a real weapon before. But if she hesitated, she would lose. A sharp clang echoed as Daniel tossed her a real knife. She caught it, barely. Gorek pulled out his curved blade, spinning it lazily in his grip. "This is going to be fun." Daniel stepped back and gave the command. "Begin." The battle begins. Gorek charged first, moving faster than Liara expected. She barely dodged as his blade sliced through the air, missing her by inches. She stumbled back, gripping her knife tightly. Too slow. She steadied herself. Think. Adapt. Survive. Gorek attacked again, his strikes powerful and aggressive. Liara ducked, dodged, twisted, but she couldn't counter. Then she saw it. His movements were strong, but predictable. Every time he swung, he left his side open for a split second. She took a deep breath. This was her chance. Striking back, Gorek lunged. Liara pretended to dodge right, then suddenly spun left. His blade missed, and for the first time, Liara struck. Her knife slashed across his arm, drawing blood. The crowd around them gasped. Gorak froze, staring at the cut. His expression changed from arrogance to shock. Daniel smiled. Now you're fighting. Liara's breath was ragged, but she didn't back down. She had done it. Gorak's shock turned to rage. With a roar, he came at her again. But this time, she was ready. She used his own momentum against him, sidestepping and kicking his leg out from under him. He stumbled, his balance lost. Liara pressed her blade against his throat. The fight was over. The turning point. Silence filled the training ground. Then Daniel nodded. Winner. Gorak's jaw clenched, but he didn't protest. He stared at Liara, something different in his eyes. Not hatred, respect. Liara stepped back, her heart still racing. She looked down at her hands, shaking, but not from fear. From adrenaline, from victory. Daniel walked up to her. For the first time, he smiled. You just took your first real step toward being a warrior. Liara wiped the sweat from her forehead and smirked. Let's keep going. The air in the training ground was different now. Liara was no longer the weak, trembling princess who had first arrived. She had drawn blood. She had won. The warriors who once laughed at her now watched in silence as she trained. But Daniel wasn't impressed yet. One victory means nothing, he told her the next morning. You got lucky. Now let's see if you can do it again. Liara's body still ached from her fight with Gorak, but she didn't complain. She had something now. Confidence. She picked up her training sword. I'm ready. Daniel smirked. We'll see. Breaking limits. For weeks, Daniel pushed her harder than before. More fights. More strategy. More endurance. She fought against multiple opponents now, using speed and skill, instead of brute strength. She learned to read her enemies' movements, to predict their attacks before they happened. And she kept winning. She wasn't the strongest. She wasn't the fastest. But she was the smartest. And that made her dangerous. The warrior's mindset. One night, as she sat by the fire, wrapping her hands after another grueling fight, Gorak approached her. She tensed, expecting another insult. Instead, he grunted, You're not weak anymore. Liara blinked, coming from him. That was as close to respect as she would get. She gave a small nod. Thanks. Daniel, sitting nearby, chuckled. Look at that. The big guy is impressed. Gorak glared at him, but said nothing. Liara looked down at her hands, once soft, now calloused. Her muscles ached, but it was a good pain. She had changed, but she wasn't done yet. Returned to the throne world. One evening, as training ended, Daniel handed her a sealed message. Your father wants you back. Liara's chest tightened. Her father. She had left his court as a weak, broken girl. Now she would return as a warrior. She met Daniel's gaze. Do you think I'm ready? Daniel studied her for a moment. Then, for the first time, he said, Yes. Liara exhaled, gripping the letter tightly. The weak princess was gone. And soon, her father would see what she had become. Liara's ship descended through the swirling clouds of the Zerthian homeworld. She stood at the viewing window, her reflection barely recognizable. The delicate, timid girl she once was had been replaced by someone harder, stronger, and more determined. Daniel's words echoed in her mind. Remember, you've already proven yourself. All that's left is to show them. The palace came into view, towering spires of black stone and glowing blue veins, a symbol of her father's power. Liara tightened her grip on the straps of her armor. This was no longer home. This was the place that had discarded her. She was here to show them how wrong they had been. The Grand Hall. The throne room was just as she remembered, cold, grand, and filled with sharp-eyed nobles who whispered behind their hands. At the far end, her father, King Vathar, sat on his massive throne, flanked by her brothers and sisters. Vathar leaned forward slightly, his crimson eyes narrowing as he took her in. You've returned. Liara's voice was steady. I have. One of her older brothers, General Kithar, smirked. She survived. I thought the human would send her back in pieces. There was a murmur of laughter, the same laughter she had heard her entire life. Liara kept her gaze forward, her expression calm. I came back stronger. Stronger. Kithar snorted. You're still a runt. You think you're a warrior now because you sparred with a human. The nobles chuckled, but the king raised a hand. The hall fell silent. Vathar's deep voice filled the room. You say you are stronger, Lyra. Prove it. The challenge. A familiar pit formed in her stomach, but Lyra stood tall. How? Vathar gestured to the arena below the throne room, a place where disputes were settled through combat. Your brother will test you. Her heart raced. Kithar was the strongest of the royal children. He had defeated countless warriors and led armies into battle. Kithar grinned, baring sharp teeth, with pleasure. The fight. Liara stepped into the arena, the sound of the nobles cheering for Kithar echoing around her. The arena floor was rough, the air thick with tension. Kithar entered, towering over her, holding a massive, gleaming blade. You're going to regret coming back, he said. Liara drew her weapon, a lighter, human-crafted blade designed for speed, not brute force. We'll see. Kithar charged first, swinging his weapon with deadly strength. Liara dodged, her movements fluid and controlled. She didn't match his power. She used his momentum against him. She danced around him, forcing him to waste energy on heavy, slow strikes. Her human training kicked in. She struck fast, precise. Small hits, each one adding up. Kithar grew angrier, his swings more erratic. The crowd's cheers turned to murmurs. And then, in a blur of motion, Lyra spun under his guard and pressed her blade to his throat. Victory. The arena went silent. Vathar stared down at her, his expression unreadable. You've improved. Liara stepped back, lowering her blade. You sent me away to die. I came back to fight. Her siblings watched her, some in shock, others in anger. For the first time, they saw her as an equal. Liara turned and walked out of the arena, head held high. She didn't need their applause. She had proven what she came to prove. The arena roared with anticipation as Liara stepped back into the combat circle. This time, she wasn't facing just anyone. Her brother Kithar, heir to the throne, stood opposite her, gripping his massive Xerthian blade. The towering warrior radiated confidence, his armor catching the faint blue glow of the palace above. You don't belong here, little sister, Kithar growled. This arena is for warriors, not weaklings. Liara didn't flinch. She was no longer the frail princess who once trembled at his words. She had fought to stand here, to prove she was more than her past. The challenge begins. Vathar, seated high above the arena, raised a hand to silence the crowd. His voice echoed through the massive chamber. This is not a fight of power alone. This is a test of skill, honor, and determination. No one will interfere. Begin. Kithar lunged first, his blade coming down in a thunderous arc. Liara stepped aside, the wind from his strike brushing past her face. Her movements were deliberate, calculated. She remembered Daniel's lessons. Don't meet strength with strength. Find their rhythm and break it. Kithar attacked again, his strikes heavy and relentless. Liara dodged, keeping just out of reach. The crowd's cheers grew louder with every swing, but Liara remained calm. She wasn't fighting for them. She was fighting for herself. Turning the tide, Kithar's confidence began to crack. He was used to overwhelming his opponents, but Liara was different. She didn't try to overpower him. Instead, she used his aggression against him. Every missed strike drained his stamina. Every heavy swing slowed him down. Liara saw her opportunity. When Kithar's blade came down again, she didn't just dodge. She stepped in, too close for him to counter, and slashed her smaller blade across his arm. The crowd gasped as blood dripped from Kithar's armor. Kithar snarled, "You'll regret that." But Lyra didn't let up. She pressed forward, forcing him to react to her speed and precision. Her blade struck his leg, then his shoulder. Each hit was small, but they were adding up. The final moment. Kithar roared in frustration, swinging wildly. Lyra ducked under his blade and spun behind him. Before he could recover, her knife was at his throat. The arena went silent. Lyra's voice was steady, but firm. Yield. Kithar's chest heaved, his face twisted in anger. For a moment, she thought he might refuse, but then, slowly, he dropped his blade. Vathar stood from his throne, his face unreadable. He looked at his daughter, not as a disappointment, but as a warrior. Enough, he said. The match is over. Honor earned. Lyra stepped back, lowering her knife. She didn't cheer or celebrate. She simply walked off the arena floor, her head high, her heart steady. The weak princess was no more. She was a warrior. The arena gates closed behind Lyra, shutting out the roar of the crowd. Her heart was still racing, not from fear, but from the thrill of victory. She had beaten Kithar, the brother who had mocked her, the father who had abandoned her, the court that had sneered at her. She had faced them all and proved them wrong. As she entered the grand hall where the royal court gathered, the murmurs of the nobles filled the air. Some were astonished, others doubtful, but all of them had seen it with their own eyes. Vathar, seated on his throne of black stone, regarded her with a stern expression. His crimson eyes narrowed as he spoke. So, you have returned to my court not as the weak daughter I sent away, but as something more. Lyra stood tall. You sent me away to die. You thought I wasn't worth saving. But I didn't give up. I learned. I fought. And I won. Her voice was clear and steady, carrying across the chamber. For once, no one interrupted her. No one laughed. Vathar's gaze shifted to Kithar, who stood to the side nursing his wounds. You lost to her, the king said, his tone flat. Kithar scowled. She fought differently. It wasn't. He trailed off, realizing that any excuse would only make him look weaker. Daniel, standing quietly near the back, stepped forward. She fought like a human. All eyes turned to him. The court regarded humans as unpredictable and unrefined, but no one could deny their effectiveness in battle. Daniel continued, his tone calm but firm. Your daughter didn't need to become stronger than Kithar. She needed to become smarter, faster, more adaptable. That's how she won. That's why she's still standing. Lyra felt a surge of gratitude toward Daniel. He had been harsh, demanding, and relentless, but he had never doubted her potential. Vathar leaned back in his throne, his expression unreadable. For a moment, silence hung over the hall. Then he spoke. It seems I was wrong about you, Lyra. You are not the weakling I thought you were. A ripple of shock passed through the court. The king rarely admitted fault. But Lyra didn't feel satisfaction. Instead, she felt something deeper, a sense of clarity. She hadn't fought just for her father's approval. She had fought to prove to herself that she was capable, that she could stand on her own. I didn't come back to earn your respect, she said. I came back to show you, and everyone here, that I'm not the girl you left behind. Vathar's lips twitched into a faint smile, one that was gone almost as quickly as it appeared. You have made your point. Now we will see what you can do with the strength you've earned. As the court began to disperse, Lyra glanced at Daniel. He gave her a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of everything she had achieved. Lyra had found her place, not as a daughter begging for approval, but as a warrior who had carved her own path. Lyra stood in the quiet training hall, her gaze drifting over the weapons that lined the walls. Each blade, each piece of armor, carried a story. Just like her, she wasn't the same person who had left this palace. She had returned as someone new, someone stronger. Daniel entered the room behind her, the faint sound of his boots breaking the stillness. He stopped beside her and crossed his arms. You did what most thought was impossible. Lyra glanced at him. You mean proving my father wrong? Daniel chuckled. That's part of it. But more than that, you've shown them something they didn't think was possible. That strength isn't just muscles or power. It's about resilience, strategy, and refusing to quit. She smiled faintly. It wasn't just about the fight. It was about how she had faced herself, her fears, and the doubts that had haunted her for so long. She had chosen not to give in, not to accept the fate others had assigned her. The new warrior. Word spread quickly through the empire. The once weak princess had defeated Cathar, one of their strongest warriors, in open combat. Some nobles whispered that she had gained human cunning, while others feared what she might become. Liara didn't care about the whispers. She had no interest in palace politics or the games her siblings played. Her focus was on something bigger, becoming more than what anyone had expected of her. When Vathar summoned her again, his tone was different. No longer commanding, no longer dismissive. You have earned your place, Liara. But the question remains, what will you do now? She looked him in the eye, unafraid. I will keep training, keep fighting, and if the time comes, I'll protect this empire as one of its warriors. Vathar nodded slowly. Then see that you are ready when that time comes. A lasting impact. Daniel prepared to leave the palace, his mission with Liara complete. But as he stood by the landing bay, Liara approached him. Leaving already? She asked. You don't need me here anymore, he replied. You've got everything you need. She hesitated. I wouldn't have gotten this far without you. You did it all yourself, Daniel said. I just showed you what was already there. Don't forget that. For a moment, they stood in silence. Then Liara stepped forward, raising a hand in a gesture she'd learned from him. A simple, human salute. Thank you, she said, her voice steady. Daniel returned the gesture, then boarded the ship and disappeared into the stars. A new beginning. Liara walked back into the training hall. Her people, once doubters, now sought her guidance. She trained alongside them, showing them not just how to fight, but how to think, how to adapt, and how to endure. She had become a warrior, not because of her father's expectations or her siblings' pressure, but because she had chosen to be one. In the end, Liara proved that strength isn't given, it's earned.